Thank you, and greetings from the provinces. I am honored, humbled, and pretty much blown away by the invitation to come here. I honestly haven't had anything like this to happen to me, and I just want you to know that I really appreciate it. It's been a great opportunity to get to know this force of nature here, and we've had some great conversations. Before I start, I just want to mention this gentleman that has the camera right here in front of me is Eric Harrison. I didn't know that I was going to see somebody that I knew when I came up here. Eric is an artist, musician, writer, local to the area. I've known him online for 12 years, and I finally got to meet him.
Oh, wonderful.
So, thanks for coming out here.
Thank you for coming.
And I'm pretty much going to just let these poems speak for themselves, if you don't mind. Instead of stuttering and stammering up here about them, I would rather let them stand on their own. So I will say a few things about them, but not all that much. So we'll see whether that works. The first one I'm going to read is about Curt Flood, and I read this last night at the table. It is one of the two pieces that I've written that actually won a contest. I wrote it for Spitball, the baseball literary magazine's contest one year, and it won first place. As a prize, they sent me a t-shirt that has their logo on it, which is a picture of Napoleon Bosway with a big feather pen instead of a bat on his shoulder. So that was my prize for that. The other contest that I won was a contest to see who could write the best short story with a dead mule in it. And it was for a magazine called Dead Mule, the School of Southern Literary something. I can't remember the whole name. But anyway, as my prize, they sent me a t-shirt, and on the front of it, it had a mule with his legs straight up in the air. On the back of it, it said, "I kicked ass at the dead mule." So, here we go. Curt Flood. Try to tell them, Curt, how you crowned their wallets, climbed courtroom steps for them, swallowed that black ball, a scapegoat out to pasture. They don't remember, can't remember, the trash you ate, your greedy headlines, the slope of your career. You are a ghost at barterer's wing. Your smoky gray eyes are 2 extra zeros on every contract. Out of date. Now it's 4. I guess you've heard of Carl Yastrzemski. I wrote this poem after either hearing or reading his acceptance speech at the Hall in 1989 when he went in. It was a very moving occasion, and one that really spoke to the idea of fathers and sons, and which is a very big theme in my books. And this is called Yaz at the Hall. The mark of the blue collar is understanding that you were paid for, free and clear to take the extra swings. When other kids are paperboy, vendor at the park, yes, someone bunted you along, fly deep, and you tagged quick, raced on his long hours, the blisters and the minutes. Someone embraced the yoke and gave you a game that you took like a paybook, ripping out contests, seasons, revealing more of the blue dream. And now today, the last installment, podium to the 3rd row, paid in full. So few fathers ever this fulfilled. And this is the only rhyming one in the bunch. And I will not read it as eloquently as what you heard out here earlier, but I've spent the past year doing performances with this performance poet named Ted Pope, and I do have experience in walking onto a stage that feels like it's on fire, which is what it felt like coming up after this gentleman over here. This is called Casey's Memoirs. A different story grew through the fog of Casey's ancient mind. The way that he recounted things set history far behind. His unchallenged memoirs told the tale of the day when Mudville's fading hopes on Casey's shoulders lay. They didn't use percentages, they just knew Casey's swing. The times that he could whip that stick, and to their feet he'd bring the tallest and the shortest, the kindest and the mean. Into his throng his drives would fly, a much familiar scene. And so when Casey took the pen, these were the things he thought, that on that day of tragedy, nothing was his fault. For the pitcher was a monster, and through such velvet heat, he rubbed and cut and scuffed the ball and was a well-known cheat. The ump wore new bifocals and hadn't learned to look at the subtle dips and turns that pitches often took. Why, he had stood stone straight and watched two errant balls called strike. But Casey was just too cool to air his great dislike. Of course he knew the third toss, no matter where it came, if he did not show some want of it, would soon be called the same. So Casey took a light cut, or that is what he wrote, not the wild and furious one that Thayer made of note. Ernest was, as Casey said, a little long of tooth, and was alleged by Casey to have often stretched the truth. The Mudville crowd was never quite what Thayer made it seem. They drank too much and cursed too loud and cheered the other team. The field was slow, unkempt, and like the village name, was never suited for such sport as our great national game. And it was only one time that Casey sank their ship. His was a long and fine career, he wrote, and this game just a slip. And now to Waiting for Godot's first pitch. And first poem in the book, and this is about some of the things that we do when we're young that when we look back they seem pretty stupid. And this was at Montreat Anderson, which is just outside of Black Mountain, which is mainly known for the place that Billy Graham lives. There was a place we'd go after the ball games. Sprung from the traps of gorgeous stone buildings at the Protestant Junior College halfway up the valley between blue, wispy, gray mountains, a wild gang of us went after the baseball games to a grassy green hillside where the train slammed through a dark tunnel and curved into uncertain darkness. Fresh air took the reek of cheap wine, beer spilled on the lush ground. The team captain alligator rolled down the ivy-colored covered hill to a drunken cursing heap at the bottom. Then it happened, a distant whistle, and a generation trained to act at the insistence of bells leaped to the gravel bed where the moonlight peeled down the tracks. We entered the mouth of the tunnel and stood erect, our backs flattened against the cement wall as the vibration from the train unsettled the ground beneath our feet. A few players still wore metal cleats. You could hear them nervously stirring the gravel as the earth began to shake and the engine blasted into the tunnel, driving its blinding light before it. The wheels clanked and clanked, crossing the raised pilings near the entrance, while the iron horse passed like a ferocious rhinoceros a foot from our chalky faces. Don't do this at home. Is there anybody here that doesn't like the Mets? Okay. Well, we don't like them down there either. Learning to hate the Mets. And remember, these things are 12 and 13 years old, so a bit dated. Here at the end of the Braves decade, and the Lord knows we paid our dues to have one, a new challenge emerges called the Mets. As a faithful follower of America's team, since they serve their hospitality as a doormat of the senior circuit, it is now officially time to learn to hate the Mets. It helps that I already didn't like them, or any team from New York for that matter, and with their off-season shopping spree and trading hysteria, I hardly know who they are, and that helps too. Because it is easier to hate a nameless beast, so it's best to pay no attention to individuals like that pretty boy catcher they stole from the Dodgers last year. I don't want to know about those pictures they procured at the fire sale either. I will learn to hate the sound of their name. I will loathe their mention in the box scores at night. I will think about them on a first grade level. When the world is still reduced to good and evil, I will learn to hate this team that I already dislike without even trying. And everybody knows who Donnie Moore is, right?
You do.
Yes, I'm sure you do. He's the guy who allowed the 2-run homer by Henderson in Game 5 of the '86 ALCS, and his life came crumbling down. Several years later, he ended up taking his own life. And this is about Donnie Moore. What can you know about Donnie Moore? Something about specialization, filing it all down to one focal point, to where a given pitch can mar you, so that nothing, the coke, the booze, can block the pain of everything rising, and the day becomes an impossible challenge of trying to keep it all down. Great literary guns once chose their own demise in a trend that approached a fictional kind of madness. Had they slipped to the one-pony show of the closer, or felt it close at hand like an already planned next chapter? What can we know about Donnie Moore? He hit no home runs, he stole no bases in 13 seasons. I watched him work hard in Dale Murphy's Atlanta, then rise to greatness in Anaheim, till that critical moment in '89 when he knew better than God what to do next. And this poem is, I believe, sort of like what my philosophy was on life 12 years ago. And I was trying to remember it when I read it, and I just thought I'd throw something in here like this. It's called "This is the Day." This is the day when every relationship and previously understood concept feels tenuous, albeit the gravity grows weak, and the voices that rise are not the sanguine few you remember as wise, the coaches that actually knew something beyond the roar of their anger. Now your days on the field are gone, or have slipped into the churn and become sweet buttered memories, not the indecisive hell of rounding second, not knowing where the ball was, and the third base coach hollering at a player on the bench while they trapped you in a rundown. You recall the running outfield catches of a sunny childhood, not the dark liner lost in the lights till it roared towards you like a car with one headlight. Memory is the shaky tightrope that you wrap your dreams around, and faith in the past, the balance that gets you through this day. Whatever that means. And I wrote a bunch of poems about Pete Rose in that particular book. And when I read these in Cincinnati, I got a bunch of people pissed off at me. Honestly, I mean, he is a polarizing figure in Cincinnati. And I've read there 3 different times. And people that don't like him really hate him. I mean, even though he was really kind of their guy. But I thought I ought to read one of these. It's called The Outlaw Pete Rose. The outlaw Pete Rose slinks down a minor league runway, hawk-eyes the prospects, shouting an illegal speech toward the stunned outfielders. The stadium attendant tells the head groundskeeper, "Pete's a good guy, really." The outlaw Pete Rose views the 1/3 of the field that he's allowed to see. The sacks that he reached over 4,000 times are hidden by railing and concrete. His profile is tan granite, turning like a jet turns away from a city. Somewhere, the horses are running, and an old man measures hoofbeats and heartbeats. An old man doomed by perfect vision. And another one about a professional athlete. Does anybody remember Al Rabowski, the mad Hungarian? We thought he was so cool. And the one thing I remember about him was let's see, I think I wrote this down. 1975, he had a 13-3 record as a reliever. How does that happen? Who knows? Rabowski. Oh, we love to watch Al. He was mad like us, or like we wanted to be, or thought we were. He was power and passion and self-parody rolled into one stocky body. It was wrestling or relief pitching. There could have been nothing else. Just as there was only one pitch and one way that he could meet with himself behind the mound while the batter clipped clods from cleats and the runners fidgeted toward whatever stake of territory they dared against this madness. When he hurled 180 to face the plate, the dark eyes, the hair, the handlebar looked more like an executioner than anything we had seen since Gibson. We loved to watch Al. He was mad, just like we wanted to be. And I talked a little bit last night about my passion for local and regional baseball history. I've written 4 books on the subject in the last 9 years. And this poem is also from the Waiting for Godot's first pitch that hasn't yet arrived to the room. And it is about this outlaw league that they had in western North Carolina between 1936 and 38. And it was a wide open surface. And that's all I'm going to tell you about it. I'll just read it. And it's dedicated to a guy named Hank Utley, whose research has been fundamental to what I've been doing during those same 8 years. I've used a lot of his research. In Outlaw Tales, digging through these pages of young faces, of the old and the dead I never knew, of hard stories of men with bleak futures, when the elevator of order had snapped a cable and sent good people swan diving from windows in busted cities, and baseball was a fizzled firework fuse, stomped all but out, all but these mad outlaws. In Carolina mill towns where fans dressed in Sunday best on a Wednesday afternoon, the women in hats, the men ready to fight the rabble from across the county, Kannapolis and Concord, Valdez and Hickory, Lenore and Shelby, the hard, depressed pride on the line with ringers stolen from minor and major league teams, college boys and gritty veterans, the innocent and the aged, come to the call of the civic dollar and the winter work at the mills, outlaws, red-cheeked boys blacklisted and footloose in this movable feast of bendable rules where names change and $5 a week could send a man 50 miles up or down the same road twice in one season. Boldly nicknamed heroes like Struttin' Bud Cheney, Razzie Miller, an ordained minister, Alabama Pitts, a paroled convict. I am digging through these pages of young faces, the benevolent mill owners whose utter influence stretched further than their stockings, dapper men who knew that people demanded more than bread, water, and Bible, men more bold than one would ever guess, outlaws, church deacons and councilmen. I think of Mark Bolick, who put an arm on my shoulder when I was fresh from college and urged me toward the cloth. An outlaw, vice president of the league. And I am so proud to know a name that comes speaking to me off of these pages against my fixed memory. Outlaw memories. Tales of balls weighted with phonograph needles. Fences blocked by shrubbery and balls stashed under for the home field advantage. Prospects convinced by money at a train stop to stay for a wild week of games. The untold gambling in a country that seemed to have no future beyond the first call of the next train whistle. The tired, hungry eyes of dusty-footed children gathered for a game under a southern sun. I'm Barton, I'm Hitchner. As trucks filled with soft cotton rolls in and out of town, while a lunch whistle at the mill calls rough-handed men to a sandwich. Outlaws stretch stories across the lusty looms of memory. And the last few that I'm going to read are people that I've known personally. So we're getting away from these national figures now. And one was a gentleman who had been in the war and had a metal plate in his head. And he was a taxi driver and a permanent usher at my dad's church for probably 50 years. And he pitched ball to the kids on the ball field for both teams. He was like a pitching machine. And it's called Ellis Had a Steel Plate in His Head. Ellis had a steel plate in his head and pins in a leg forever stiff. He had so little feeling in his hands that he caught and fielded the ball barehanded. On the grassy field beside the scout hut, he was a pitching machine, overhand or underhand for both teams. Before our meetings and after them in the summer, it was an all-arm delivery, and sometimes a comebacker smacked him on the shin. But he would just reach down, pick up the ball as if pain were not a part of his world. Bald, middle-aged, and solid-built, Ellis was the closest thing that we ever had to those new robot pitchers. But Ellis cared where the ball went, and when he put his pipe down, forgot his taxi, the war wound, the bad wreck, a life of hard labor, always a second job, Ellis pitched for both sides till the sun went down and the game was finally over. One of the things that I do in my job at Catawba Valley Community College, I got my plug in for my school, is I'm in charge of the Students with Disabilities program. And this was, I think, maybe 10 or 11 years ago. I was talking to a blind woman, and she told me this story about how she taught her two sons to hit the baseball. And this is about her. Her name was Sherry, so I named the poem Sherry. Two boys, one to hit and one to field, then to switch. She'd mapped the yard and knew where the bushes were, where the clothesline ran. Her back to the plate, she marked off this year's spot with confident steps. Turned till the sun glinted off the thick shade she'd worn since she left the hospital, since her husband slammed her into the stone fireplace, destroying her eyes. She felt the seams of the ball, aligning them with her first two fingers. She knew the boys' height from hugging them every day. She knew how to come forward and when to let go. She knew to duck that would sometimes get hit by grounders. Sherry threw strikes that only her sons could see. No wonder they became all-star players. No wonder they became good men. And last night I talked a little bit about this gentleman named Cook Calvin Mull, who was a motel man that I worked with for 8 or 9 years and had many adventures with, going to ball games and such. And this poem, excuse me, this poem is about him going to the 49 Crosstown series. Does anybody remember that? Sure. Okay, that's what it's about. And one thing you need to know about him is he was drunk for 40 years. And this was during that time period. And he was the greatest storyteller I've ever met. When the 49 series went crosstown, and I apologize for some of the language in it, Dodgers versus Yanks, Cook Mull knew he had to be there. First to convince his buddy George Poovey to freight him and his furniture delivery to Philly. From there, a night train to New York City. With Poovey thus ensnared, they proceeded from quiet Catawba County. First stop, the liquor store. Second, somewhere in Philly to ditch the truck, then to make for the city. Huckleberries that they were, they beelined for the empire, becoming separated in the upper 20 floors, and Poovey, after an hour of wandering around, located Cook in a bar, tumultuous in storytelling high gear, being fed and given drinks to keep the comedy rolling. In the Bronx, they managed to get seats, but Ebbets was sold out, and the boys were packed in the back of a horrible throng near the roof. But Poovey, who was a man of action, reached the limit of his affability and along with an exaggerated scratch of his privates, he moaned like Wolf's Gant, a most heart-rending redneck truck driver moan, calling aloud to the very gods of baseball, "These crabs are about to drive me completely nuts." And as Cook always told it, the crowd around them parted like the Red Sea, and they went forward to a righteous view of the remainder of the game. My goal was to get George to laugh. Okay, one remaining here. And I told the folks last night we have a single-A minor league baseball team in Hickory that I go to see occasionally. And the first years that they had the team, they started back in '92. In the first 7 or 8 years, there was a gentleman in his late 70s probably, who was an usher. And they called him the dancing usher because that's what he did. And he was good. I mean, he was all over the place. Until there was some point where he went down on the field one night and started taking his clothes off. And I think that pretty much ended it. But this poem is about him, and it also says kind of what I have to say about baseball as a sport right now in this country, or at least right now or 12 years ago. The Dancing Geezer. At LP Franz Stadium, where the Hickory Crawdads play, there is a dancing usher. The stadium is state-of-the-art, and so is he. A man of at least 70 years, my kids call him the Dancing Geezer. When Credence blares from the speaker system or funky John Cougar Mellencamp, the geezer unhinges his act, moonwalking, gyrating with a perfect rhythm and sense of style, performing 100 uncalculated moves for which there is no name except dancing. The kids love him, would never consider who he might be, though I choose to think he's retired from upper management and retail clothing, that he spent many days in New York City as a buyer. Watched the Dodgers, the Giants, the Mets, and even the hated Yankees when he got a chance. He saw Snyder, Hodges, the Clipper, Mays, Mantle, Pepitone, Seaver. He watched Cloninger open Atlanta, then followed their stinkiness on and off the field for decades hence, till hometown ball came back to Hickory, and it was enough to make him dance. To dance for his buddies dead and gone, to dance for the rowdy kids who bring gloves to the park, to dance for the women who occasionally share his fancy, to dance for the memory of all the women he's known, for all the home runs he's seen, for the smell and taste of hot dogs and beer and peanuts, for the magical day when America was still a baseball country, had not yet given its allegiance, fist and pistol, to the pigskin. Thank you very much, everyone.